Mike Kern here with Adam Emmenecker for another Shootaround segment. And Adam, the big game of the weekend, as we are sitting here on a Wednesday with two weeks and 1 day before the conference basketball championship. Bradley Drake. Bradley goes into Des Moines, avenges a loss they suffered in Peoria. What a great game that was, and looks like they've got their mojo back. And Duke Dean has a different body English than he had in their losing streak.
Yeah, you knew it was coming at some point, right? You knew Brian Wardle and that experienced team was going to be the team that we saw earlier in the year and the team we're used to seeing. I think you mentioned it, Mike. They just in that revenge game kind of got a little of that swagger back, and it was a good back and forth game. Drake had a great opportunity to be able to send it to overtime right at the end of regulation. So for any Drake fans bummed out against the loss, sometimes you just lose to good teams, right? And I think this game was a lot more about Bradley and their swagger. I thought Demarion Birch looked healthy, like he's taken steps forward in his overall like aggressiveness and decision making. I thought Jaquan Johnson, even though he only scored 2 points, made a huge impact defensively and with his hustle. And this Bradley group, you look at what they can do collectively. You talk a lot about their 3-point shooting and the balance on offense, but how much they frustrated Bennett Sturts, the guy who's most likely going to be player of the year in the league here in a couple of weeks. No one's been able to hold that guy down at all. And against Bradley, he's averaging just 6 points per game in those two games. That's the only two games all year Bennett Sturts has been held under double digits. So, it was a big win for Bradley. The balanced attack of Hannah, Davis, Montgomery, and Dean. If you're Coach Brian Wardle, that's exactly what you want to see. We'll see if this can propel Bradley to kind of get in the top 75 in the net and start to win a few more games down the stretch. And, a big bounce back week for Drake coming off of that loss. No rest for the weary, hosting UIC and then at UNI. So a couple teams toward the top of the league really give them a chance to test their resolve.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a 14 separations with Drake, Bradley, Northern Iowa, within a game of each other. Belmont right there knocking on the door. The next teams are all bunched together. Let's talk a little bit about Evansville. You've seen them recently,
Yeah.
and they're a dangerous team. They have Indiana State Wednesday.
It's interesting. You looked at Evansville at the beginning of the year, and they've had their couple of stumbles and had games where they just really haven't played well at all and just kind of laid an egg offensively. But it looks like they're starting to figure it out a little, and I think the balance is starting to get there. And part of the reason for that, Connor Turnbull in the game this weekend and how he's been playing recently, he's like an entirely different person. We knew he could block shots, conference leader in blocks. But in his last three games, 20 points per game, 8 rebounds per game, a couple blocks, a couple assists for a guy that, on the season is still only averaging 7.5 points. That was around 5 just a few days ago. So I think Connor Turnbull, what he is a vertical threat. His ability to score in the paint and his ability to run the floor and protect the rim really changes this group. It gives them an anchor defensively, and you balance that with Tayshawn Comer, who's just an absolute bulldog getting downhill and drawing contact, getting to the rim, and Gabriel Pizzato, a really good looking freshman who is long and lankier than I expected to see in person. Now for Coach David Ragland, this Evansville group, you're kind of on to something with that defensive identity and the way that they're able to spread you out a little and attack on the offensive end.
You mentioned defensive identity, and they'll have to deal with Samaj Teal, who had 36 against Illinois State over the weekend, most points by a Sycamore in 10 seasons. But that should be an interesting matchup on Wednesday. Let's hit on some of those other teams in that mix and that 5 to 10 range, if you will, and give your thoughts on who's the most dangerous of that bunch as we head down the last 4 games of the regular season.
Yeah, so you mentioned, Mike, that at the top of the league, it's maybe a little bit of separation, right? Drake with a game lead over Northern Iowa and Bradley, who have a couple game lead over Belmont, but those are the top four with at least a 2 game cushion for Belmont to be in that Friday game as opposed to playing Thursday night. But then you look in that next mix, 5 to 10, and only one game separates. So UIC at 8-8, and then a bunch of teams at 7-9. And so we talk about like, why is there so what do we mean when we say parity in the league? What do we mean when we say Arch Madness is wide open? Well, when you look at each of the teams, just going down the list and wonder, well, what are they capable of? I think every single team in that list, if they play really well, can beat anyone in the league. And so if Drake plays well and UIC plays really well, I think UIC can win that game. So you look at UIC. UIC has beaten both Bradley and Drake. You go next on the list. You have Illinois State. Illinois State has 6 losses to those top 4 teams by a combined 21 points. They are just a hair away from winning those games, and 2 guys that are all league caliber level, Chase Walker and Johnny Kinzinger. You go next to Indiana State. You just mentioned Samaj Teal is unguardable at times, and this is an incredibly potent offense with a lot of 3-point shooters that can honestly is almost impossible to defend, especially when they're shooting the ball really, really well. You go down then to Murray State. Murray State won at Drake. That is as long and athletic of a tandem at the guard position as there is in the league between Wood, Ferguson, Milton, Harcum. When they're clicking, they're really hard to play against. We just talked about Evansville. Evansville won at Belmont pretty convincingly. Then you look at SIU, Southern Illinois, even though they ran into a speed bump, they're still 7-4 in their last 11. They swept UIC. They beat UNI. You have Ali Deba and Kennard Davis. Both of those are as long and lanky and disruptive as wings than we have in this league. So, you just go through all those teams. Not only have they beat the teams in the top of the standings, most of them have a win or two, but just you think about the balance and how they play. That's why this league is so stinking wide open and what's going to make Arch Madness so fun.
It is crazy. So Drake goes to Springfield, almost loses to the Bears. That's a 1 versus 12 matchup. So the Missouri State Bears are capable. Valpo's
Yeah.
taking a bunch of teams to the limit. It will be a great tournament. And by the time we talk next week, we'll either know more or we won't. So 2 more games will be played by everyone, and we'll see where we are in a week. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of idea of what the seedings could be. We'll dust off the tiebreakers and be ready to go.
Yeah, and you mentioned Valpo. Valpo also beat UNI, and they beat Belmont, plus the close loss to Bradley. Missouri State beat UNI and took Drake to overtime. So even the 2 teams that have the most separation, they're right there as well. Big thing for me coming up, not only a lot of games to watch, we're getting to postseason awards too. So I'll be studying up and seeing within the next week or so if we can start to hammer out some of those final
Yeah,
decisions.
we'll get your thoughts on that next week. Looking forward to hearing about your picks for Player of the Year and some of the other specialty awards, and we'll talk in a week.
All right, can't wait.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate
Thanks,
the time.
man.
All right. Bye bye.